I pulled my suitcase up the steep driveway of my $5 million Malibu home, exhausted from a grueling 2-week financial audit in Geneva. The ocean breeze carried the familiar scent of salt and eucalyptus, a smell that usually meant I was finally safe from the chaos of the corporate world. I slid my custom key into the heavy brass lock of the front door. It did not turn. I jiggled it. Nothing. The lock had been completely replaced. Then I looked down and saw them. 6 cheap cardboard boxes were stacked carelessly on my pristine front lawn, right next to the sprinkler heads. Taped to the top box was a handwritten note in my sister Rachel's loopy handwriting. It said, "We are doing this because we love you. Please get some help." I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply smiled, pulled out my phone, and prepared to destroy my entire family. My name is Claire, 33 years old, and I am a forensic accountant. For my entire life, I have been the family punching bag, the quiet workaholic who funded everyone else's dreams, while my own needs were completely ignored. But they made a massive, unforgivable miscalculation when they decided to steal my house. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic family members who thought they could walk all over you. Trust me, you are going to want to hear exactly how I set this trap. Standing on the manicured grass of my own property, I unzipped the top box. Inside were my most personal belongings, my college diplomas, my winter coats, and to my absolute horror, the wooden urn containing my grandmother's ashes casually tossed beside a pair of muddy sneakers. The sheer disrespect made my blood run cold, but my mind remained incredibly sharp. You learn to detach your emotions when you spend your days tracking down millions of dollars hidden by corporate fraudsters. I pulled out my phone and dialed Rachel. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was dripping with that fake, sugary concern she always used when she wanted to play the victim. "Oh, Claire," she sighed into the receiver. "I see you found the boxes. Please do not make a scene. The neighbors are already watching." I stared at the heavy oak front door of my house. "What exactly am I looking at, Rachel?" She let out a theatrical gasp. "Do not use that tone with me." Andre and I had to step in. "Mom and Dad are worried sick about you. You have been working yourself to the bone, flying all over the world, isolating yourself from us. You are clearly having a severe mental health crisis. So as your family, we made an executive decision. We took over the property to manage it for you. It is for your own good. You need to check yourself into a facility and heal." A mental health crisis. That was her brilliant angle. Rachel, at 35 years old, had never worked a real job in her life. She was the golden child, the beautiful daughter who married Andre, a flashy but deeply indebted entrepreneur who loved wearing designer suits he could not afford. They were drowning in massive debt, and my $5 million unencumbered asset was just sitting there tempting them. "You changed the locks on my house," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "You packed up my grandmother's ashes like garbage and put them on the lawn." "You are being dramatic, Claire," Rachel snapped instantly, dropping the concerned sister act. "You are not thinking clearly right now. Andre handled all the legal paperwork. Everything is perfectly legal and notarized. You signed the quitclaim deed last month before you left for Europe. Mom and Dad both witnessed it. Now stop embarrassing yourself and leave before we have to call the police." She hung up. The line went dead in my ear. Perfectly legal. Notarized. Mom and Dad witnessed it. The absolute audacity of their lie was breathtaking. They had actually forged a property transfer of a $5 million estate, completely convinced that I would just crumble, cry, and walk away, because I had always avoided family conflict in the past. They thought my silence meant weakness. They thought my demanding career meant I was too distracted to notice their desperate financial schemes. They had no idea that I had spent the last 6 months setting up an invisible legal and financial minefield around this exact property, waiting for their relentless greed to push them right into it. I opened my text messages and tapped on the contact for Naomi, my ruthless corporate attorney. I typed a single simple sentence. They took the bait file, everything now. I hit send, feeling the satisfying vibration of the phone confirming the message was delivered. The dominoes were officially in motion. I bent down, carefully picked up my grandmother's urn, and placed it securely in my leather tote bag. Just as I zipped the bag closed, the heavy deadbolt on my front door clicked from the inside. The door swung open, revealing Andre standing in the foyer of my home, a smug grin on his face, flanked by two uniformed police officers. Andre adjusted the lapels of his tailored maroon velvet blazer. As a tall and strikingly handsome black man, Andre always knew exactly how to command a room and manipulate an audience. He had built his entire adult life on projecting a level of immense wealth and success that he did not actually possess. Now he was using that same smooth, undeniable charm on the two police officers standing beside him. He looked down at me from my own doorway with a perfectly practiced expression of pity, shaking his head slowly as if my presence on my own front porch was a tragic symptom of a diseased mind. "Officers, this is exactly what I was telling you about inside," Andre said, his voice deep and soothing. "This is my sister-in-law, Claire. As I explained to you, she has been going through a severe psychological breakdown. The pressure of her corporate job finally snapped her. My wife and I have had to step in and take control of her assets to prevent her from ruining her own life. We asked her to vacate the premises weeks ago so she could seek treatment, but she is clearly not grounded in reality right now." The older of the two officers stepped forward, resting his hand casually on his heavy duty belt. "Ma'am, I am going to need to see some identification," he said firmly. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or throw a tantrum like my family expected me to. I calmly unzipped my leather tote bag, pulled out my driver's license, and handed it over. The officer scrutinized the plastic card and then looked back up at me amazed. "Claire, your brother-in-law here has provided us with documentation showing that you recently transferred the ownership of this property to him and your sister. He is asking that we remove you from the premises for trespassing." "Transferred the property," I repeated, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "That is fascinating. May I please see this documentation?" Andre quickly held up a thick manila folder, pulling out a single sheet of heavy stock paper. He did not hand it to me, but he held it just close enough for the officers to see the heavy embossed notary seal at the bottom of the page. "It is a standard quitclaim deed," Andre explained smoothly to the police. "She signed it over to us completely free of coercion. We are just trying to protect the house's equity before she squanders it on her delusions." I looked at the older officer, making direct and unblinking eye contact. "Officer, does that man look like a financial protector to you? Because what you are looking at is a man who is currently drowning in 7 figures of high-interest debt." Andre's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Claire, please," he warned, his tone suddenly dropping an octave. "Do not do this to yourself in front of the authorities." I ignored his fake sympathy and addressed the police directly. "Let me save you some valuable time, officers. My brother-in-law Andre loves to call himself a cryptocurrency and real estate entrepreneur. What he conveniently leaves out of his flashy elevator pitch is his extensive history with the federal bankruptcy courts. If you run his name through your system right now, you will find a Chapter 7 bankruptcy filed in 2018 after his very first startup completely collapsed. You will also find a Chapter 11 reorganization filed just last year when his real estate limited liability company went under, leaving dozens of independent contractors completely unpaid and ruining several local small businesses in the process. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably on his feet, glancing sideways at Andre. Andre puffed out his chest, his face flushing with sudden defensive anger. "That has absolutely nothing to do with this property," he snapped loudly. "Those were strategic corporate restructuring moves. They are standard business practices for high-level investors. You would not understand because you are just a glorified calculator." "A forensic accountant, actually?" I corrected him easily. which means my entire job is tracking the missing money of desperate men who think they are smarter than the federal government. Men exactly like you, Andre. You do not have the credit score to finance a used Honda Civic, let alone manage a $5 million estate. You are heavily leveraged. Your creditors are closing in fast, and you saw my unencumbered house as a massive floating life raft. You are not protecting my equity. You are trying to steal it to pay off your own catastrophic failures. The air on the front porch grew incredibly thick and tense. The officers exchanged a weary look. They were patrol cops, not financial investigators, and it was painfully obvious they did not want to be dragged into a complex, white-collar family dispute. "Look," the older officer finally said, holding up a hand to stop the argument. "We do not handle credit scores or corporate bankruptcies here. We handle immediate disturbances and property rights. Right now, this man has a notarized legal document stating he has the right to possess this property. If you believe this document is fraudulent, that is a civil matter that you need to take up with a judge in a courtroom. But today, right now, he is the legal occupant." Andre instantly regained his composure, flashing that brilliant hollow smile at the officers. "Thank you, officers. As you can see, she is deeply confused. I just want her to leave peacefully so she can get the medical help she so desperately needs." The older officer turned to me, his expression softening slightly, but his stance firm. "Ma'am, you need to step off the property now. If you believe this paperwork is invalid, you will have to hire an attorney and file an injunction. But if you stay here today, I will have no choice but to arrest you for criminal trespassing." I nodded slowly. "I understand, officer. I have no intention of causing a disturbance. I will leave." I reached down to pick up the handles of my leather tote bag. The weight of my grandmother's urn inside grounded me. I did not shed a single tear. I did not tremble. I stood up straight. Andre was watching me closely, his eyes narrowing. He was waiting for the explosion. He was waiting for the hysterical, screaming woman he could point to as proof of my supposed mental breakdown. When I offered him nothing but absolute freezing calm, I could see the first tiny fracture of doubt appear in his confident facade. I slung my bag over my shoulder and took a step toward the driveway, then paused. I turned back to Andre, keeping my distance from the officers. "Tell me something, Andre," I said, my voice conversational. "When you and my parents sat down to forge my signature on that quitclaim deed, what color pen did you use?" Andre stiffened. The younger officer glanced back at us, but since I was technically leaving, he did not intervene. "I do not know what you are talking about," Andre replied loudly, making sure the cops heard him. "You signed it yourself in the kitchen before your flight. You used a black ballpoint pen. We all watched you do it." I smiled, a genuine bright smile. "A black ballpoint pen. That is incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for confirming that small detail." He frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in confusion. "What is that supposed to mean?" I took another step down the porch stairs, turning my body so I was facing him fully. As a forensic accountant, my entire professional life revolves around the microscopic details of financial fraud. I spend my weeks examining corporate documents, bank statements, and legal contracts. Because of the highly sensitive nature of my work, I have a very strict personal protocol. I never, under any circumstances, sign a legally binding document with a black pen. Black ink can be easily photocopied, scanned, and manipulated to look like an original signature. I only use a custom-ordered fountain pen with a very specific shade of midnight blue ink. It contains trace elements that make it impossible to replicate on a standard color scanner. Andre stared at me. The smugness was entirely gone from his face, now replaced by a rigid, uncomfortable stillness. He opened his mouth to speak, but I did not let him interrupt. So I continued, keeping my tone light and educational. "If you present a document to a judge with my supposed signature in basic black ballpoint ink, any competent forensic document examiner is going to tear it apart. They will look at the pressure points of the pen strokes. They will look at the chemical composition of the ink itself. And when they see it is a cheap dollar store pen, Instead of my custom midnight blue, they are going to ask my parents under oath why they perjured themselves. You are bluffing. Andre spat, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper so the officers by their patrol car could not hear him. You signed it. You are just crazy. You are making this up to scare me. Am I? I asked softly. Go check my home office, Andre. Look in the top right drawer of my mahogany desk. You will find my pen case. Check the ink cartridges. Then look at the piece of paper you are holding right now. You rushed the forgery. You got sloppy. Because you are an arrogant amateur playing a professional's game. You thought stealing a house was as easy as signing a piece of paper. I turned my back on him and walked down the long paved driveway toward my car. I could feel his eyes burning into my spine. I knew exactly what he was doing right now. He was staring at that manila folder, his mind racing, wondering if I was telling the truth, wondering if he had just made a fatal error that would land him in prison. He had. But the ink color was just a tiny scratch on the surface of the federal trap I had built for him. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. The police cruiser pulled away from the curb. I started the engine. I was not going to a hotel. I was going straight to the source of the infection. I was going to my parents' house. The drive to my parents' house took 20 minutes, but felt like an eternity. They lived in an upscale gated community in Calabasas where everyone hid dark secrets behind manicured rose bushes. I parked half a block away and walked. I could hear upbeat jazz music and clinking glasses before reaching their driveway. I walked through the side gate into the sprawling backyard. It was a picture-perfect Sunday barbecue. My father Thomas stood by the grill flipping expensive steaks. My mother Susan poured champagne into crystal flutes. Sitting on the outdoor sofa was my sister Rachel. She was holding a mocktail and laughing loudly. A handmade banner hung across the back deck. It read, "Congratulations, Andre and Rachel, on the new Malibu estate." The sheer audacity made my chest tighten. I did not storm in screaming. I simply walked across the stone patio and stood at the edge of the outdoor rug. Rachel saw me first. Her laugh died. Her eyes widened and the color drained from her face. She dropped her mocktail glass with a loud clatter. The sound made my mother turn around. Susan froze the champagne bottle, hovering midair. Thomas lowered his spatula. The jazz music suddenly felt incredibly loud in the heavy silence. "What are you doing here?" my mother demanded. Her voice was thick with defensive rage. "I am just here to admire the decorations," I said, gesturing toward the banner. "Celebrating the theft of your own daughter's home with steaks and champagne. Did you use my college fund to buy the meat too?" Susan slammed the bottle onto the granite counter. She marched across the patio, stopping mere inches from my face. Her eyes blazed with furious entitlement. "You listen to me, you ungrateful brat," Susan hissed, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "We did what we had to do. You are entirely absorbed in your corporate audits, completely neglecting your real family. Rachel is pregnant. She is bringing a new life into this world. She and Andre need a safe place to raise their child. You are a selfish single workaholic who is never even in the country. What do you need a $5 million house for? So because I chose to build a career instead of marrying a bankrupt con artist, my assets are automatically up for grabs. Is that how the law works in your head, Susan?" The use of her first name lit the powder keg. My mother raised her hand and slapped me hard across the left cheek. The crack of her palm echoed sharply over the music. My head snapped to the side. A hot redness blossomed across my jawline. Rachel let out a dramatic gasp, covering her mouth with both hands, as if she were the victim of the sudden violence. Thomas did not intervene. He just watched from the grill, a cold expression on his face, silently endorsing the assault. I slowly turned my head back to look at my mother. I did not flinch. For my entire life, I had contorted myself to fit their mold, trying to buy their affection with financial support. The physical pain was nothing compared to the profound, icy clarity that settled over my brain. Any lingering shred of familial obligation was instantly incinerated by that slap. "You hit me," I stated plainly, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "You deserved it," Susan spat back, though her hand trembled. You come into my home disrespecting your sister and me. We gave you life. We raised you. You owe this family. Taking that house is just us collecting on a debt you have ignored for years." I looked past her to the banner flapping in the breeze. I looked at Rachel, who was clutching a throw pillow. Then I looked back at the woman who gave birth to me. "You think I owe you a debt?" I asked, stepping closer so she was forced to look directly into my eyes. "You think signing a forged document clears the ledger? You have no idea what debt actually looks like, Mother. But I promise you, by the time this week is over, you are going to learn everything there is to know about federal liabilities." I turned away from her and walked over to the patio table. I leaned down so my face was level with my sister's. "Enjoy the Malibu house, Rachel. I highly suggest you do not start unpacking your bags just yet." Without another word, I turned my back on all of them and walked out the way I came. I had only taken 5 steps across the lawn toward the side gate when my father's footsteps crunched on the stone path behind me. "Claire, stop right there," Thomas barked. His voice carried the booming, authoritative tone he used to discipline me when I was a child. I stopped, but I did not turn around immediately. I took a slow, deep breath before finally turning to face him. He stood a few feet away, holding his spatula like a weapon. His face was flushed from his own indignation. "You are making a massive mistake walking away from this family," he warned. "You think you can just march in here, insult your mother, threaten your pregnant sister, and throw around your fancy corporate titles." "I did not threaten anyone, Dad. I stated a fact. You stole my house. We did not steal anything." Thomas countered, his chest puffing out with pride. "You left us no choice. And if you think you can just hire some cheap lawyer to undo this, you are severely underestimating me. I spent 40 years as a senior loan officer at one of the largest commercial banks in California. I know exactly how the system works." I tilted my head, studying him. "And how exactly does your banking experience justify real estate fraud?" Thomas scoffed, taking a step closer. "It is not fraud when it is family, Claire. It is wealth redistribution. You were sitting on a gold mine while your sister was struggling, so I called in a favor. An old colleague of mine, a certified notary public, owed me for a promotion I gave him 20 years ago. He was more than happy to stamp a power of attorney and the quitclaim deed without you needing to be in the room. He knows you are my daughter. He knows I have your best financial interests at heart." I stared at him, genuinely impressed by the magnitude of his arrogance. "You are standing in your backyard, casually confessing to organizing a conspiracy to commit wire fraud, all to cover for Andre's catastrophic failures." "Andre is an entrepreneur," Thomas snapped. "He takes risks. But he is a family man. He is giving us a grandchild." "What are you giving us, Claire? You have given this family nothing but cold shoulders and a terrible attitude." My jaw tightened. "I give you nothing. How about the $80,000 you stole from my college savings account?" The backyard grew deathly quiet. I knew Rachel and Susan were listening from the patio, but I kept my eyes locked entirely on my father. "That money was meant for my tuition." I continued, my voice slicing through the air. "Grandpa left that specific trust for my education because he knew what you would do if you got your hands on it. But the moment I turned 18, you found a legal loophole to drain every single penny. You took my entire future and blew it on an extravagant 200-guest wedding for Rachel so you and Mom could show off to your country club friends. I had to take out massive student loans and work 3 jobs just to survive my freshman year while Rachel was sipping champagne on a honeymoon in Bora Bora that I unknowingly paid for. You lived under our roof for 18 long years." Thomas roared, his face turning an angry shade of purple. "We fed you. We clothed you. That money belonged to the family unit, and as the head of the house, I decided where it was best utilized. Rachel needed a proper start to her marriage. You were always smart enough to figure it out on your own. You owe us for raising you. That house in Malibu is just you finally paying us back today for everything we sacrificed." I looked at the man who had always viewed me as an automated teller machine rather than a daughter. He actually believed his own delusions. He genuinely thought that because he provided basic shelter during my childhood, he was entitled to harvest the fruits of my grueling labor for the rest of my life. "I am glad you think so highly of your banking connections, Dad," I said softly, "because you are going to need every single one of them to explain to a federal judge why you coerced a notary into falsifying real estate documents." I turned around, pushed the side gate open, and walked out to the street. I did not look back. I marched down the quiet suburban sidewalk, my pulse finally beginning to race. The afternoon sun beat down on my shoulders as I reached my parked car. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and locked it immediately. Dark clouds had rapidly gathered over the San Fernando Valley, replacing the harsh afternoon sun with a sudden, violent downpour. Heavy rain pelted the windshield of my car. As I sat in the driver's seat, the rhythmic drumming matching the rapid beating of my heart. I did not turn the key in the ignition. Instead, I reached over to the passenger seat and pulled my heavy-duty encrypted laptop from my work bag. As a forensic accountant handling highly sensitive financial data for international corporations, my personal security protocols border on the obsessive. When I purchased the Malibu estate, I did not just install a standard alarm system. I hardwired military-grade microcameras into the smoke detectors, the HVAC vents, and the custom crown molding of every major room. They operated on an independent cellular network completely separate from the house Wi-Fi. My family thought I was just a boring number cruncher. They had no idea they had just broken into a fortress designed to catch professional criminals. I booted up the laptop, entered my 32-character alphanumeric password, and opened the surveillance dashboard. The screen flickered to life, displaying a grid of 6 high-definition video feeds from inside my house. I maximized the feed from my home office. Andre was pacing back and forth across my vintage Persian rug, holding his cell phone to his ear. He had already poured himself a glass of my expensive scotch. His velvet blazer was unbuttoned, and he looked both frantic and deeply excited. The audio feed was crystal clear. "Yes, that is correct," Andre said into the phone, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "The property is fully unencumbered, zero mortgage balance. The estimated appraisal is just over $5 million. I am looking to pull out $4 million in a cash-out refinance, and I need the underwriting expedited." I leaned back in my car seat, listening to the rain and the sound of my brother-in-law digging his own grave. A cash-out refinance. It was the oldest, most desperate trick in the playbook for failing real estate bros. He was using the forged quitclaim deed to claim ownership of the house, and now he was trying to use the house as collateral to borrow $4 million in pure cash from a major lender. I listened as the loan officer on the other end of the line asked him a question. Andre laughed, a smooth, practiced sound. "No, the previous owner was my sister-in-law." He lied effortlessly. "It was a family transfer. We kept it entirely off-market. I have the notarized quitclaim deed right here on the desk in front of me. Yes, I can upload the PDF to your secure portal right now." He sat down in my leather office chair, placed his laptop on my mahogany desk, and began typing. My cameras captured every keystroke. He was using his own email address. He was operating from an IP address inside the state of California, sending forged legal documents to a federally insured bank located in New York. In the eyes of the law, Andre was no longer just a terrible husband or a greedy relative. The moment he transmitted that forged deed across state lines to secure a multi-million-dollar loan, he crossed a massive legal threshold. He was actively committing federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and bank fraud. Each of those charges carried a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. I watched him take a celebratory sip of my scotch. He thought he had won. He thought he had outsmarted the quiet, compliant sister-in-law. He believed that by the end of the week, $4 million of tax-free cash would hit his bank account, allowing him to pay off his furious creditors, keep his fake millionaire lifestyle afloat, and impress my toxic parents. He was so blinded by his own greed that he completely failed to perform even the most basic due diligence on the property he was stealing. If he had hired a real title company instead of rushing a fake transfer through my father's corrupt notary friend, he would have discovered the massive, lethal secret I had buried deep within the property records. But Andre was arrogant, and arrogance is the best friend of a forensic accountant. I minimized the video feed and opened a secure virtual private network. It was time to make sure Andre's fraudulent loan application did not get accidentally rejected by the bank's automated fraud detection software. I needed the bank to approve it without hesitation. I needed the cash to hit his account fast, because the federal crime is only fully complete and totally irreversible when the stolen funds officially change hands. I started typing. My fingers flew across the keyboard. As a senior investigator, I possessed top-tier security clearances that granted me backdoor access to the master databases of almost every major financial institution and title registry in the country. It was a tool designed to freeze the assets of international money launderers, but today I was using it to monitor a domestic parasite. I routed my connection through a secure server bypassing the public interface and slipped directly into the automated underwriting system of the New York bank Andre had just called. I located his loan application instantly. It was sitting in a digital queue flashing yellow. The bank's preliminary fraud detection algorithms had already flagged the submission. A sudden, unrecorded quitclaim deed transferring a $5 million property with zero money changing hands was a massive red flag. Under normal circumstances, this application would have been frozen, kicked back to a human underwriter, and subjected to a rigorous title search. That title search would have immediately exposed my father's fake notary stamp. The loan would have been denied by Tuesday morning, leaving Andre empty-handed but still legally safe from major federal prosecution because no money had actually been stolen yet. I could not let that happen. A denied application was a mere inconvenience. It would only result in my family finding another sneakier way to come after my assets. I needed a completed felony. I needed them locked into a situation they could never lie their way out of. I opened the document Andre had just uploaded. The image of the forged deed filled my screen. Seeing my own signature clumsily replicated in basic black ink sent a fresh wave of cold anger washing over me. They had not even tried to make it look convincing. My father had stamped his seal on the bottom right corner, entirely confident that his legacy in the banking world would shield them from any real scrutiny. They thought they were untouchable because they were family. They believed the rules did not apply to them when it came to exploiting the daughter they always viewed as nothing more than a financial resource. I accessed the bank's manual override terminal. My screen prompted me for an administrative authorization code. I typed in my credentials, feeling the satisfying weight of every keystroke. This was the exact moment I could have stopped everything. I could have permanently flagged his file, locked the deed, and called the local authorities to have them evicted. It would have been the easy way out, but easy was not what my family deserved. They deserved the full, devastating force of the system they thought they could manipulate so easily. The system asked me to categorize the risk level of the flagged document. I selected the lowest possible tier. I marked the title transfer as verified and classified the fake quitclaim deed as a standard intra-family conveyance. I systematically disabled the alerts that would have triggered a mandatory manual review by the bank's legal department. Then I moved my cursor over to the final authorization button. It glowed bright green on my screen. Approving this step meant the automated system would rubber stamp the $4 million cash-out refinance. It meant the bank would clear the funds and prepare to wire the money directly into Andre's personal checking account within 48 hours. Once that wire transfer cleared the Federal Reserve System and landed in his account, the trap would snap shut. He would be in possession of stolen federal funds secured by a fraudulent document sent across state lines. The holy trinity of white-collar crime. I did not hesitate. I clicked approve. The yellow flashing warning on his file immediately turned green. The status changed from pending review to cleared for funding. A digital receipt popped up confirming that the wire transfer was scheduled for execution. I let out a long, slow breath. The deed was done. Andre had officially secured his own destruction, and I had handed him the shovel. I watched the surveillance feed one last time. Andre was still sitting at my desk, grinning broadly as he refreshed his email. He saw the automated approval notification hit his inbox. He pumped his fist in the air, completely oblivious to the fact that his victory dance was being recorded and stored on a secure server, ready to be presented as Exhibit A in a federal courtroom. I closed my laptop. The heavy rain continued to wash over my car, obscuring the affluent neighborhood around me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from Naomi, my attorney. It simply said, "Are we green?" I picked up my phone and typed my reply. Green across the board. The wire is scheduled. Let them spend it. I put the car in drive, pulled away from the curb, and drove back toward the city. I needed to book a luxury hotel suite and wait. The next few days were going to require patience. I had to let them celebrate their stolen victory before I crushed them entirely. I spent the next 4 days working from a high-rise hotel suite in downtown Los Angeles. My days were filled with international conference calls and forensic audits for my actual clients. But my secondary monitor was permanently locked onto my Malibu property. I watched Andre pacing the living room, anxiously checking his banking app. I watched Rachel directing interior decorators replacing my carefully chosen furniture with gaudy velvet sectionals. They were settling in, completely oblivious to the countdown clock ticking above their heads. On Thursday afternoon, my cell phone vibrated across the glass desk. The caller ID displayed Rachel's name. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow sip of my coffee before answering. "Hello, Rachel," I said, my voice flat and professional. "Claire." Rachel breathed heavily into the receiver, her voice trembling with manufactured fragility. "I am so glad you picked up. I have been so worried about you." "Worried enough to steal my grandmother's urn and dump it on the lawn in the rain," I replied. "Please, Claire, stop being so hostile," she sobbed. The tears sounded incredibly real. She was always the star of her own imaginary soap opera. "You are twisting everything. You know Mom and Dad were just trying to help you. You were spiraling. But your reaction the other day at the barbecue, it was terrifying. You really scared me, Claire. My obstetrician says my blood pressure is dangerously high because of the stress you are putting on me. If anything happens to this baby, it will be your fault. I am putting stress on you," I asked, genuinely marveling at her ability to flip the script. "You broke into my house, forged my signature, and illegally transferred my property into your husband's name. But somehow my reaction to being robbed is the real medical crisis here. We did not rob you," Rachel cried, her voice rising in pitch. "We protected the asset. You were not in your right mind. But Andre and I have been talking, and we do not want this to tear the family apart permanently. We want to be generous. We want to help you get back on your feet because we love you even when you are being impossible and cruel to us." "Generous," I repeated. "Yes." Rachel sniffled, regaining her composure. "Andre spoke with his attorney today. He advised us that the best way to move forward and heal as a real family is to get everything formalized properly so there are no lingering resentments. We want to offer you a financial settlement to help you secure a nice apartment and pay for whatever therapy you need. But we have to do it by the book." I knew exactly what they were doing. The $4 million wire transfer had likely hit Andre's account that morning. Now that he had the cash, his sleazy lawyer had probably warned him that a forged quitclaim deed could still be challenged in civil court if I decided to sue. They needed me to sign an airtight release of claims, a non-disclosure agreement, and a legal waiver to retroactively legitimize their fraud. They were trying to buy my silence with the very money they had just stolen using my property. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. They wanted to crush me, take everything I owned, and then act like my saviors by tossing me a few breadcrumbs. "You want me to meet you at a lawyer's office?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly hesitant, playing the role of the defeated, exhausted sister. "Tomorrow at 10 in the morning," Rachel instructed, her tone suddenly shifting from weeping victim to bossy older sister. His office is in Beverly Hills. Mom and Dad are going to be there too. They want to see you, Claire. They want to know you are okay. Just come in, sign the paperwork, and we can put all this ugliness behind us. Dad is getting older, Claire. His heart cannot take this kind of division. You can finally have a fresh start and we can be a happy family again. I stared at the surveillance feed on my monitor. Andre was currently popping a bottle of expensive champagne in my kitchen, pouring 2 glasses and handing one to Rachel, who took a healthy sip despite her supposed pregnancy complications. A fresh start, I murmured. That sounds exactly like what I need right now. So you will be there, Rachel asked, relief flooding her voice. I knew you would come to your senses. I will be there, I promised. Send me the address. I hung up the phone and called my own lawyer, Naomi. She answered on the first ring. They took the bait again, I told her. The wire must have cleared. They are calling a meeting tomorrow to try and force me into signing a release of claims. Naomi chuckled darkly on the line. They are trying to plug a sinking ship with paper. Do you want me to come with you to tear them apart? Not yet, I replied. Let them think they hold all the cards. I am going to walk into that Beverly Hills office completely alone and play the broken family scapegoat one last time. The next morning, I pulled my rental car into the underground parking garage of a shiny glass building in Beverly Hills. I had intentionally dressed down for the occasion. No tailored suits or power heels today. I wore a faded oversized beige sweater, plain black slacks, and minimal makeup. I made sure to look every bit the exhausted, defeated woman they desperately needed me to be. I took the elevator to the penthouse suite of a firm that specialized in aggressive real estate litigation. The receptionist barely looked up from her screen as she directed me down a long hallway to Conference Room B. When I pushed open the heavy glass door, the hostile energy in the room was suffocating. The entire family was already assembled, looking like a poorly cast corporate drama. My mother Susan and my father Thomas sat rigidly on one side of the massive mahogany table. Rachel sat opposite them dramatically, resting a hand on her barely visible stomach, playing the fragile, expectant mother. Andre stood at the head of the table, leaning forward on his knuckles in what he clearly thought was an intimidating power pose. Next to him sat a balding man with slicked back hair in a cheap pinstripe suit. This was obviously his attorney. Take a seat, Claire Andre commanded, his voice dripping with condescension. He gestured to the lone empty chair at the far end of the table, physically isolating me from the rest of the group. I walked over slowly, pulling out the heavy leather chair and sitting down. I kept my shoulders slumped and my eyes lowered. I am glad you finally decided to be reasonable, my father grumbled, adjusting his watch. We do not have all day. Let us get this over with so we can get back to business. Andre cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and began pacing slowly behind his lawyer. Claire, I know you're upset about how things went down at the house, but you have to look at the bigger picture. You were sitting on a $5 million asset and doing absolutely nothing with it. It was completely dead equity. As a family, we could not just watch you hoard that kind of capital while you were having a mental breakdown. Dead equity, I repeated softly, playing the confused victim. Exactly, Andre said, his eyes lighting up as he launched into his rehearsed pitch. You are an accountant, Claire. You understand spreadsheets, but you clearly do not understand wealth creation. I am putting your dead equity to work. By transferring the property to my name, I was able to leverage the asset, inject immediate liquidity into our family portfolio, and bypass unnecessary capital gains taxes through strategic corporate restructuring. It is basic economics. I kept my face perfectly blank, but inside I was laughing so hard I could barely breathe. He was literally regurgitating terrible financial advice he probably heard on a social media video. His understanding of American tax law was not just rudimentary, it was completely flawed. First of all, transferring a property does not magically bypass capital gains taxes. It actually triggers a massive taxable event under federal law, if not filed through a highly specific trust structure. Secondly, he had not restructured anything. He had simply committed mortgage fraud to secure a cash-out refinance. He thought the term liquidity made him sound like a Wall Street titan, but all it really meant was that he had successfully stolen $4 million of federal funds. He had absolutely no idea that the house he thought he was leveraging was already tied to a massive hidden federal tax lien that I had intentionally attached to the offshore trust years ago. By putting his name on that forged deed, he had not secured a family portfolio. He had legally volunteered to pay my $3.5 million tax debt. Andre stopped pacing and leaned on the table again, looking at me with immense pity. I am building a legacy for this family, Claire, a real estate empire. You were just using that massive house to sleep in between your business trips. It was a waste of resources. He nodded to his lawyer. The balding man slid a thick stack of stapled papers across the polished mahogany table toward me. This is a standard global release and non-disclosure agreement, the lawyer stated in a bored, monotone voice, tapping a gold pen on the table. It stipulates that you retroactively consent to the property transfer, waive your right to any future civil or criminal litigation regarding the Malibu estate, and agree to cease all harassment of my clients. It also legally binds you from discussing this family transaction with any outside parties. I looked down at the thick document, my heart steady and cold. They were trying to build a paper wall to stop an incoming federal train. And what exactly do I get in return for signing away a $5 million house? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Andre smiled a slow, predatory grin that did not reach his eyes. You get a second chance, Claire. You get freedom from the burden of property management, and you get immediate liquid capital to help you transition into a more suitable lifestyle. He snapped his fingers. The sleazy attorney opened a leather folio and pulled out a crisp, rectangular piece of paper. Andre took it and slid it across the polished mahogany table with 2 fingers. It stopped right next to the thick stack of legal documents. I looked down. It was a cashier check made out to my name. The amount written on it was $50,000. $50,000. For a $5 million fully paid-off estate in Malibu. It was exactly 1% of the property value. It was also, coincidentally, roughly the same amount of money they had drained from my college fund years ago, adjusted for inflation. The poetic irony was almost suffocating. I knew for a fact that exactly $4 million in cash-out refinance funds had landed in his checking account just yesterday afternoon. He was offering me a fraction of a percent of his stolen cash to retroactively absolve him of federal wire fraud. "We are not leaving you empty-handed," Rachel chimed in, leaning forward with her hands clasped together in a perfect picture of sisterly concern. "We know you do not have anywhere to go right now. Rent in Los Angeles is so expensive, and with your fragile mental state, who knows if you will even be able to maintain your demanding corporate job. This money will get you a nice, quiet apartment, maybe a modest 1-bedroom in the valley. It will give you a financial cushion while you seek the psychiatric help you so desperately need." I stared at the check, forcing my hands to shake as I reached out and touched the edge of the heavy paper. 50,000, I whispered, making sure my voice cracked just enough to sound entirely broken. "You took my home and you are giving me $50,000. "It is an incredibly generous gift," my father Thomas interrupted harshly. He crossed his arms over his chest, glaring at me from across the table. "You should be thanking your sister and brother-in-law. If we wanted to, we could have just let the legal system deal with your eviction. You would have been dragged out by the county sheriff with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back. We are giving you a golden parachute because we are still your family despite your terrible attitude." "Your father is absolutely right," Susan added, her voice dripping with that familiar maternal condescension. "You have always been so ungrateful, Claire. Look at what Andre is doing for you. He is taking on the massive financial responsibility of that huge estate, the property taxes, the landscaping, the maintenance, just so you can focus on getting your mind right. $50,000 is more than enough for a single woman with no dependents to start over. What more could you possibly need? I kept my head bowed, staring at the check, listening to them justify the most blatant theft I had ever witnessed in my entire professional career. They actually believed they were being magnanimous. They had stolen $4 million in federal funds using my house as collateral, and they were tossing me a $50,000 scrap from their stolen feast, expecting me to lick their boots in gratitude. Andre stood up straight, adjusting his expensive velvet blazer. "The offer is only on the table right now, Claire," he warned, his tone shifting from fake generosity to a hard businesslike edge. "If you walk out that door without signing the release agreement, I will cancel the cashier check immediately. Then my attorney will file a permanent restraining order against you for harassing my pregnant wife. You will be homeless, you will be broke, and you will be tied up in brutal civil litigation for the next decade. And let me tell you, your fancy corporate accounting firm is not going to keep an investigator on staff who is facing a very public mental breakdown and a messy family lawsuit." He was trying to corner me. He was using every toxic manipulation tactic in the family playbook: fear, guilt, isolation, and financial threats. It was the exact same strategy they had used to control me since I was a teenager. They break you down, isolate you from the outside world, and then convince you that their abuse is actually a form of rescue. The balding attorney finally spoke up, tapping his gold pen on the release agreement. "Ms. Claire, I highly advise you to take the deal. My clients have airtight documentation regarding the property transfer. If we go to court, you will lose, and I will personally ensure you pay all of our legal fees. This check is your only lifeline." I took a deep, shuddering breath. I needed to sell this performance completely. If they suspected for even a second that I was in absolute control, Andre might try to move the stolen funds offshore, making it much harder for the federal government to seize the money. I had to let them win the battle today, in this miserable little office, so I could completely annihilate them in the war tomorrow. I let that deep, shuddering breath hitch in my throat, transforming it into a loud, pathetic sob. I buried my face in my hands, allowing my shoulders to shake violently. It was not entirely difficult to cry. I just had to think about how utterly hollow my entire childhood had been, how these four people had systematically tried to strip away every ounce of my self-worth for over 3 decades. The tears that leaked through my fingers were real, but the reason behind them was something they could never comprehend. "I am just so tired," I wept, making sure my voice sounded completely broken. "I am so tired of fighting all of you. I just wanted to build something for myself. I wanted you to be proud of me, Dad. But no matter what I do, it is never enough. It is always about Rachel. It is always about what she needs." The room went still. This was exactly what they wanted to hear. They thrived on my supposed misery. It validated their narrative that I was the unstable, jealous spinster, and Rachel was the triumphant, deserving matriarch. Susan sighed, a soft, patronizing sound. She reached across the table and patted my arm exactly once before pulling her hand back, as if my failure was contagious. "Oh, Claire, we are proud of you, but you simply do not have the emotional bandwidth to handle real wealth. You are too erratic. This is a blessing in disguise. You will see that once you get your medications balanced." I wiped my wet cheeks with the sleeve of my oversized sweater, looking up at them with red, swollen eyes. Andre was practically glowing. His chest was puffed out, and he was looking at me the way a hunter looks at a mounted trophy. He picked up the gold pen from the table and held it out to me. "Just sign the papers," Claire, Andre said softly. "Take the 50,000. Go find a nice little place. Let us handle the heavy lifting from now on." I reached out my hand, trembling so violently that I almost dropped the pen. The balding attorney quickly flipped the heavy legal document to the final page, tapping his manicured index finger on the signature line. "Sign here, and initial at the bottom of pages 3, 7, and 9. The lawyer instructed briskly, clearly, eager to wrap up his billable hours. I gripped the pen. I let the nib hover over the paper for a long, agonizing moment, playing the hesitant victim to the bitter end. Rachel let out a loud, impatient huff, rolling her eyes. I finally pressed the pen down and signed my name. I flipped through the pages, initialing exactly where the lawyer pointed. Every stroke of the pen was a nail in their collective coffin. By signing this document, I was officially legally acknowledging their transaction, which meant the bank's wire transfer was completely locked in. There was no going back for them now. The lawyer snatched the document back the second I finished the last initial. He quickly reviewed the pages, nodded at Andre, and stamped it with his own notary seal. "It is finalized," he announced. Andre immediately relaxed, slouching back in his chair with a massive, victorious grin. He picked up the $50,000 cashier check and tossed it across the table. It fluttered down right in front of me. "Grab that on your way out," Andre sneered, dropping the caring brother-in-law act instantly. "And listen, Claire. My contractors are coming in tomorrow to rip out that hideous kitchen island you installed. We are throwing a massive housewarming party at the estate next Saturday to celebrate our new portfolio. All of our high-end investors and the entire extended family will be there." Rachel smiled sweetly, resting her head on Andre's shoulder. "We will send you an invitation, of course. But honestly, Claire, given your current state, it might be best if you skip it. We would hate for you to have another episode in front of our important guests." I picked up the check with shaking fingers and slid it into my purse. I stood up slowly, keeping my head bowed. "I will keep that in mind," I whispered. Thomas stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Good. I am glad we could handle this like adults. Have a safe drive back to wherever you are staying, Claire." I turned around and walked toward the heavy glass door. I did not look back. I could hear Rachel giggling about her new kitchen cabinets before I even crossed the threshold. Let them laugh. Let them plan their lavish party. They had just signed away their lives, and I was holding the receipts. The heavy glass doors of the office building slid shut behind me, cutting off the muffled sounds of my family celebrating their supposed victory. I walked across the sunlit lobby and stepped into the private elevator that led down to the underground parking garage. The moment the steel doors closed, my posture instantly straightened. The trembling in my hands vanished. I reached into my purse, pulled out a compact mirror, and calmly wiped the remaining fake tears from my cheeks. I stepped out of the elevator into the dim, cool air of the concrete garage. A sleek black luxury sedan was idling in the corner parking spot, its headlights off. I walked over, pulled the passenger side handle, and slid into the leather seat. Naomi was sitting behind the wheel, tapping away on a secure digital tablet. She wore a sharp charcoal suit and possessed the kind of ruthless, unbothered energy that made her the most feared corporate attorney in Los Angeles. She did not even look up as I buckled my seatbelt. "How was the performance?" Naomi asked, her voice crisp and efficient. Worthy of an award, I replied, my voice completely devoid of the fragile emotion I had just weaponized upstairs. "They bought every single second of it. Andre even tried to lecture me about wealth creation while handing me this." I pulled the $50,000 cashier check from my purse and tossed it onto the center console. Naomi finally looked up from her tablet, glancing at the check with a smirk of absolute disgust. "50,000, she scoffed. "They stole a $5 million asset and tried to buy your silence with the equivalent of a mid-range sedan. It is almost insulting how little they think of your intelligence." "They had their sleazy lawyer draft a global release and non-disclosure agreement," I explained, settling back into the comfortable leather seat. I signed it. I initialed exactly where they told me to. They believe they have completely immunized themselves against any future civil lawsuits regarding the property transfer. Naomi smiled, a predatory expression that promised absolute ruin for my family. "That is perfect. By making you sign a release agreement, they have officially documented their intent to defraud. They have locked themselves into the narrative. They cannot claim ignorance or a misunderstanding later. But more importantly, I have some excellent news for you." She tapped the screen of her tablet a few times and held it out for me to see. It was a secure read-only interface showing a real-time transaction log from the New York Lending Institution. Look at the timestamp from 20 minutes ago, Naomi instructed. I scanned the glowing green text. There it was. An outgoing wire transfer for exactly $4 million. The destination was an account registered under Andre's limited liability company in California. The status simply read completed. The funds hit his account while you were upstairs crying, Naomi stated, taking the tablet back. The money has officially moved. And because the originating bank is headquartered in New York and his receiving account is in California, the funds cross state lines. I nodded, feeling a deep, cold satisfaction settle in my chest. The moment electronic funds associated with a fraudulent transaction cross state lines, the crime is no longer a local issue. It is no longer just a messy family dispute over a piece of real estate. It is federal wire fraud, I said. Exactly, Naomi confirmed, leaning her forearms against the steering wheel. Federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and bank fraud. Each of those charges carries severe mandatory minimum sentences in a federal penitentiary. Andre is no longer dealing with a civil judge in a local county courthouse. He just invited the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service into his living room. And because he submitted the forged documents online, the digital footprint is permanent and undeniable. He invited us all to a massive housewarming party at the Malibu estate next Saturday, I told her. He wants to show off his new portfolio to his high-end investors and the entire extended family. Naomi threw her head back and laughed. A housewarming party to celebrate a house he just used to commit a federal felony. The arrogance is truly spectacular. We are going to let him spend the next week feeling like a king. We will let him spend some of that stolen money on expensive cars and gaudy furniture. The more he spends, the tighter the federal noose gets. What about the check? I asked, gesturing to the $50,000 sitting on the console. Do I cash it? Absolutely not, Naomi said, putting the car in drive. We hold on to it. It is physical evidence of their attempt to extort your compliance. We will bring it to the party next Saturday. It will be the perfect accessory for when the federal agents kick the doors down. I looked out the window as we drove out of the dark parking garage and into the bright Los Angeles sunlight. The trap was completely set. The money had moved. The laws had been broken. Now all I had to do was wait for the grand finale. I spent the rest of the weekend in my hotel suite, transforming the dining table into a digital forensics command center. I had my encrypted laptop, 2 external monitors, and a dedicated server running software designed to capture and archive every single piece of electronic communication. If my family wanted to play the roles of wealthy socialites, I was going to be their most devoted audience. I knew that the moment the $4 million wire transfer cleared, the money would burn a hole in Andre's pocket. He was a man who craved external validation more than oxygen. He could not just quietly pay off his massive debts. He had to show the world that he was a winner. The spending spree officially began on Monday morning. My phone vibrated on the glass desk. It was a direct text message from Rachel. I opened it to find a high-resolution photograph of a bright orange Hermes Birkin bag sitting proudly on the custom Italian marble kitchen island of my Malibu home. The text below the image was dripping with venomous cheer. Retail therapy, she wrote. The baby absolutely loves the smell of expensive leather. Andre really knows how to spoil his family. Hope your little apartment hunt is going well. Remember to check for mold. I did not reply. I simply pressed a few keys on my laptop, exporting the image, the metadata, and the timestamp directly into a secure folder labeled Federal Evidence. The metadata embedded in the photo proved she was standing inside my house, and the timestamp linked perfectly with the timeline of the fraudulent wire transfer. By Tuesday afternoon, Andre decided it was his turn to gloat. My screen lit up with a notification from Instagram. I had created a burner account months ago specifically to monitor his desperate social media presence. Andre had just gone live. I clicked the notification and watched in high definition as he strutted around the showroom of a luxury exotic car dealership in Beverly Hills. He was wearing a new designer suit, loudly laughing with a salesman. The camera panned to reveal a matte black Lamborghini Urus. Generational wealth moves only. Andre practically shouted into his phone, leaning aggressively against the hood of the $250,000 vehicle. From dead equity to maximum liquidity. You have to know how to leverage your assets, people. Big things coming for the family portfolio. He actually tagged my old inactive social media account in the broadcast just to make sure I saw his supposed triumph. I downloaded the entire video in pristine quality and sent it directly to Naomi with a single word attached. Beautiful. Wednesday brought even more chaos. The family group chat, which I had muted but intentionally never left, exploded with activity. My mother Susan began uploading dozens of photos. She had hired a massive crew of private contractors to begin tearing up the Malibu estate. I watched through my surveillance cameras as workers ripped out the imported hardwood floors in the dining room and smashed the custom cabinetry I had meticulously chosen just 2 years prior. Susan typed a long message to the group, finally making this cold place feel like a real family home. Rachel has such incredible taste. It is going to look stunning for the big housewarming party on Saturday. My father Thomas immediately replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Andre is really stepping up as the man of the house, he wrote. It is great to finally have some strong financial leadership in the family. The absolute sheer audacity of them documenting their own crimes was staggering. As a forensic accountant, I have tracked down international embezzlers and corporate thieves who went to extraordinary lengths to hide their stolen money in offshore shell companies. But my family was so deeply consumed by their need to prove their superiority over me that they were publicly broadcasting their own money laundering operation. On Thursday night, Andre sent me one final text message. It was a picture of a long printed receipt from a high-end jewelry boutique on Rodeo Drive. He had purchased 2 solid gold Rolex watches, dropping another $80,000 in a single afternoon. His text read, "Time is money, Claire. Thanks for the seed capital. Enjoy your 50 grand. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my black coffee, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. Every single luxury purchase they made was a separate, undeniable instance of money laundering. The federal government absolutely loves a heavy paper trail. By spending the cash out, refinance money on exotic sports cars, designer handbags, and expensive jewelry, they were proving to the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation that the bank loan was never intended for corporate restructuring. It was entirely for personal enrichment. They were elevating their own criminal charges with every single swipe of the debit card. The trap was no longer just set. The jaws had snapped completely shut, and they were actively tightening the steel teeth around their own necks. I closed my laptop and looked out at the glittering Los Angeles skyline. Tomorrow was Friday. The caterers would be arriving at the Malibu house to set up for the grand event. And on Saturday, I was going to wear my best dress and burn their entire fake empire to the ground. Friday morning arrived with a crisp, urban energy that I could almost feel through the thick glass of my hotel suite windows. Naomi walked through the door at exactly 8 in the morning carrying 2 massive leather briefcases. She did not bother with small talk. She dropped the heavy bags onto my dining table, popped the brass latches, and began pulling out thick stacks of watermarked legal documents. The final preparations for our Saturday night raid were officially underway. We need to review the federal tax code filings one last time before we brief the special agents this afternoon, Naomi said, handing me a freshly printed dossier. I want to make sure every single paper trail is absolutely bulletproof when the raid goes down. I opened the dossier. The top page was the actual legitimate deed to my Malibu estate. It was not in my name. It had never been in my personal name. That was the massive, lethal secret my family completely failed to uncover. When I purchased the property 2 years ago, I did not just sign a standard mortgage like an amateur. As a forensic accountant who handles international corporate shielding, I bought the estate through a highly secure offshore entity called the Horizon Management Trust. The trust technically owned the physical property, and I was simply the primary beneficiary. But more importantly, I had intentionally attached a massive legally binding federal tax lien to the estate. The lien was a highly complex financial instrument. It was a structured corporate tax liability worth exactly $3.5 million. In my hands, utilizing my specialized corporate tax shields and international write-offs, that lien was safely managed and completely harmless. It was basically a phantom debt used to offset international gains. But if that property were ever transferred out of the trust to a private individual without the proper corporate restructuring, that phantom debt would instantly become a very real, immediate, and unpayable personal tax liability. That brings us to the fatal flaw in my father's brilliant plan, Naomi said, tracing a manicured finger over the forged quitclaim deed Andre had uploaded to the bank. Your father Thomas used his corrupt notary friend to stamp this forgery. By bypassing a legitimate title company, they avoided a mandatory title search. A real title agent would have immediately spotted the $3.5 million federal tax lien attached to the property. But because your father thought he was smarter than the system, they flew completely blind. I smiled, feeling a deep thrill of vindication. And because they used a quitclaim deed, Andre did not just transfer the physical house to his name. Under American real estate law, a quitclaim deed transfers the property along with every single existing encumbrance, debt, and lien attached to it. Naomi laughed, a sharp, genuine sound of amusement. Exactly. Andre thinks he stole a $5 million unencumbered asset. What he actually did was legally volunteer to personally absorb your $3.5 million corporate tax bill. When he signed that deed, and when he forced you to sign that global release agreement earlier this week, he locked himself in as the primary debtor to the Internal Revenue Service. But the genius of the trap went even deeper. Because Andre had just completed a cash-out refinance securing a $4 million loan from a federally insured bank in New York, the situation had evolved from a massive tax mistake into a catastrophic federal felony. He had used an asset that already owed $3.5 million to the government as clean collateral to borrow $4 million in cash. The moment the Internal Revenue Service realizes he has $4 million in liquid cash sitting in his California bank account, they are going to freeze it and seize it to satisfy the tax lien he just inherited, I explained, looking at the flowcharts Naomi had drawn up. The New York bank will immediately realize they have been defrauded because their collateral is completely underwater, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation will arrest him for using interstate wire transfers to execute the bank fraud. Naomi finished packing the documents back into her briefcases. It is a beautiful, flawless collision of federal agencies. He is going to be hit by the IRS, the FBI, and the bank's litigation team all at the exact same time. I stood up from the table and walked into the bedroom. Hanging on the closet door was the dress I had selected for the housewarming party tomorrow night. It was a stunning, floor-length silk gown in a shade of deep, unapologetic crimson. It was not the dress of a defeated, mentally fragile scapegoat. It was the armor of a woman who was about to execute the most brutal, legally perfect revenge imaginable. I ran my hand over the smooth fabric, perfectly ready to step into the fire. At 2 p.m, Naomi and I walked through the glass doors of the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in West Los Angeles. We were escorted past the security checkpoints and led down a sterile corridor to a secure conference room. Sitting at the metal table were two people who held the power to completely erase my family's fake empire. Special Agent David Harrison from the White Collar Crime Division sat next to Investigator Rebecca Thorne from the Internal Revenue Service. Naomi bypassed all pleasantries, sliding thick, organized files across the table while I connected my encrypted laptop to the secure wall monitor. For the next 2 hours, we walked the federal agents through every single agonizing detail of my family's greed. Harrison examined the IP address logs I had pulled from the bank's digital portal. "You are certain these login credentials match the router at the Malibu estate?" he asked, his eyes scanning the lines of code. I nodded. Absolutely. Andre used his personal laptop connected to the house Wi-Fi to upload the forged quitclaim deed to the New York bank. He transmitted fraudulent legal documents across state lines to secure a $4 million cash-out refinance. I also have the audio and video surveillance of him verbally confirming the fraudulent transfer to the loan officer. Harrison wrote something down on his yellow legal pad. That gives us bank fraud and federal wire fraud. Since he used your name and signature to execute the theft, we are adding aggravated identity theft to the list. That carries a mandatory consecutive 2-year prison sentence on top of whatever he gets for the wire fraud. What about the notary stamp? Naomi slid the original forged deed toward him. The notary is Thomas Clare's father. He is a retired commercial banker. He knew exactly what he was doing. He used an old colleague to blindly stamp the document without Clare being present. We consider him a primary co-conspirator. Investigator Thorne picked up the deed, tapping her pen against the paper. She had a sharp, calculating gaze. Let us talk about the money. The $4 million hit his California account yesterday morning. Because the property is technically owned by the Horizon Management Trust, which carries a $3.5 million federal tax lien, the moment he transferred the deed to his own name, he personally assumed that massive tax debt. He thinks he found a loophole to build generational wealth, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. He has already started spending the cash on luxury cars and designer jewelry. Thorne smiled a cold, bureaucratic expression. The Internal Revenue Service does not care about his luxury cars. The moment that $4 million landed in his account, it became subject to immediate federal seizure to satisfy the outstanding tax lien he voluntarily adopted. My office has already drafted the asset freeze orders. By tomorrow morning, every single bank account tied to his name and his business will be completely frozen. His credit cards will decline. His new cars will be marked for repossession. But we need him comfortable until tomorrow night, Naomi interjected, leaning on the table. They are throwing a massive housewarming party at the estate tomorrow evening. The entire extended family and dozens of his supposed investors will be there. We want to execute the warrants when he is surrounded by his audience. It will completely shatter the false narrative they have built around Clare. Agent Harrison looked at Investigator Thorne. She gave a curt nod. Harrison closed his folder and stood up. I will take this to the federal magistrate judge right now. Given the flight risk associated with $4 million in stolen liquid cash, getting the arrest warrant signed will take less than an hour. We will coordinate a joint task force with the Internal Revenue Service. We will let them enjoy their caviar and champagne, and then we will shut the entire operation down. I reached into my purse and pulled out the $50,000 cashier check Andre had thrown at me. I slid it across the table toward Agent Harrison. You might want to add this to the evidence locker. It is their attempt to buy my silence. Extortion and witness tampering. Harrison picked up the check, shaking his head. They really thought they could steal a $5 million house and pay you off with pocket change. They have no idea who they are dealing with. No, I replied softly, closing my laptop. They do not, but they will find out tomorrow night. We left the federal building just as the sun was beginning to set over Los Angeles. The legal machinery was now fully operational. The federal warrants were being printed. The tactical teams were being briefed. My father's banking connections could not save him now. My mother's manipulative tears would have no effect on armed federal agents. And Andre's smooth-talking sales pitches would bounce right off the thick concrete walls of a federal holding cell. The noose was tied tight, and they had willingly placed their own heads inside it. All I had to do now was get dressed. Saturday morning broke with a flawless, cloudless blue sky that local real estate agents always charge extra for. It was very quiet, peaceful, and absolutely perfect for a day of reckoning. I was sitting at the glass dining table in my hotel suite, going over the final timeline Naomi had sent over, when a sharp knock echoed from my door. I walked across the thick carpet and pulled the door open. A young hotel concierge stood in the hallway holding a thick cream-colored envelope sealed with an elaborate wax stamp. He informed me that it had been dropped off by a private courier just moments ago. I tipped him close the door and carried the heavy envelope back to the table. I did not need to guess who it was from. The return address was printed in raised, elegant typography. It was my own address in Malibu. I slid my letter opener under the wax seal and pulled out the contents. Rachel had spared absolutely no expense. It was a lavish, gold-foiled invitation, printed on cardstock, so thick it felt like a slab of marble. The ornate cursive script announced a grand housewarming gala hosted by Andre and Rachel, celebrating the expansion of their family and their new real estate portfolio. The details listed an open bar featuring imported champagne, a live string quartet, and catering provided by one of the most exclusive culinary teams in Los Angeles. They were pulling out all the stops. This was not just a family gathering. This was a calculated theatrical performance designed to cement their fake status among the local elites. I knew exactly who was on the guest list. Our entire extended family had been invited, including the aunts and uncles who had always treated me like the socially awkward outcast. But Andre was also casting a wider net. He had invited his network of flashy, superficial business contacts he was desperately trying to impress to keep his crumbling financial facade intact. He was using my home and the $4 million he had just stolen against it to bait a new pool of victims into his inevitable next scam. He wanted everyone to see him as the ultimate self-made titan standing in the foyer of a $5 million estate. I flipped the heavy card over. On the back, written in Rachel's looping, perfectly practiced handwriting, was a personalized note. She could not resist twisting the knife one last time. The note read, "Claire, we are having over 100 guests tonight to celebrate our new beginning. Such a shame you decided to isolate yourself from the family. Wish you could afford to be here. Love, Rachel." I read the words 3 times. Wish you could afford to be here. The pure, unadulterated irony of that sentence was almost intoxicating. She was writing to me from a house I bought funding a party with money she stole and pitying me for a poverty that did not exist. I traced the gold foil lettering with my thumb, feeling a profound wave of calm wash over me. They actually believed they had won. They thought I was sitting in a cheap apartment somewhere, crying over my $50,000 check too broke to show my face. I set the invitation down next to my laptop and opened the surveillance dashboard one last time before the guests began arriving. The feed from the backyard cameras showed absolute chaos. A team of 20 caterers was frantically setting up massive white event tents on my manicured lawn. Florists were arranging towering centerpieces of white roses on dozens of rented tables. A massive ice sculpture was currently being installed right next to the swimming pool. And there was Andre pacing back and forth on the patio in a custom-tailored tuxedo, barking orders at the event staff like he was a billionaire. I switched the camera view to the master bedroom. Rachel was sitting at my custom vanity, having her hair and makeup professionally done by a team of stylists. She was wearing a silk robe, sipping a mimosa, and laughing loudly at something the makeup artist said. They were both living in a fantasy world built entirely on a foundation of federal crimes. They had no idea that while they were busy selecting the perfect hors d'oeuvres and adjusting their designer clothes, the United States government had already frozen every single penny they thought they possessed. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside. The invitation sat on the glass table, catching the morning sunlight. I placed it carefully into my designer clutch. It was the perfect prop for the upcoming evening. The stage was finally set. The arrogant actors were in their expensive costumes, and the oblivious audience was about to arrive. The afternoon hours bled into early evening, casting long shadows across the floor of my hotel suite. It was time to shed the pathetic, oversized sweater I had worn to the lawyer's office and step into the woman I actually was. I walked into the bedroom and unzipped the garment bag hanging on the closet door. The crimson silk gown slipped over my shoulders, fitting perfectly. It was a masterpiece of tailoring, elegant but completely unapologetic. I sat at the vanity mirror and applied my makeup with the precision of a corporate surgeon. A sharp contour, a bold red lip matching the flow of the dress and hair pulled back into a sleek, severe style. Looking at my reflection, there was not a single trace of the crying, terrified sister they thought they had defeated. I looked like a financial executioner. My encrypted cell phone chimed from the mattress. I picked it up and accepted the secure video call. Naomi appeared on the screen, sitting in the passenger seat of an unmarked Federal Command vehicle. Next to her was Special Agent Harrison, wearing a dark tactical vest over his crisp white dress shirt. "We are in position about half a mile down the Pacific Coast Highway," Harrison reported. "The caterers have finished setting up the tents, and the first wave of guests is arriving at the front gate. The private valet service is parking luxury cars on the south lawn. They have a massive turnout tonight." "Are the asset freezes officially active?" I asked, checking the clasp of my diamond earrings. "Investigator Thorne confirmed the freezes 20 minutes ago," Naomi answered with a fierce, anticipating smile. "Every single banking account tied to Andre, Rachel, and your father is locked tight. Their credit cards will decline the second they try to run a tab with the catering company. They are hosting a party they can no longer pay for." "Good," I said, turning away from the mirror. "I will arrive at the property at exactly 8 o'clock. Give me exactly 15 minutes to take the stage and explain to my family what they have done. Let them hear the truth from me first. Once I drop the hammer, you move in." "Understood." Harrison nodded, his expression completely serious. "We have 20 federal agents standing by in unmarked vehicles. The moment you give the verbal signal, we will block the front gates and surround the entire perimeter. Nobody leaves the property until we have our primary targets in handcuffs." I ended the call and slipped the phone into my designer clutch right next to the gold-foiled invitation Rachel had sent me earlier that morning. Before leaving the suite, I walked over to my leather tote bag on the luggage rack. I reached inside and gently pulled out the wooden urn containing my grandmother's ashes. The very same urn Rachel and Andre had callously tossed onto the wet grass like garbage. Taped securely to this bottom was a faded Polaroid photograph of my grandmother and me from when I was 10 years old. In the picture, she was hugging me tightly, whispering that I was smart, capable, and worthy of unconditional love, independent of whatever my parents thought of me. She was the only person in that sprawling, toxic family tree who ever saw me as a human being instead of a financial asset. I traced her smiling face with my thumb, feeling a heavy weight settle in my chest. "I am so sorry they disrespected you," I whispered to the photograph, my voice thick with emotion. "I am sorry it took me this long to finally see them for who they truly are. But I promise you their reign of manipulation and theft ends tonight. They will never hurt anyone again." I carefully placed the urn and the photograph back into the tote bag, leaving it securely locked inside the hotel safe. I picked up my clutch, smoothed the silk of my crimson gown, and walked out the door without looking back. The elevator ride down to the marble lobby felt like a ticking countdown clock. When the doors opened, the air was cool and electric. A sleek black town car was waiting at the curb, arranged by Naomi to ensure I arrived with the intimidating presence the moment demanded. I slid into the plush leather back seat. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror, putting the car in drive. "Where to, miss?" he asked respectfully. "Take me to Malibu," I replied, staring out the tinted window at the glowing city lights as we pulled onto the busy street. "Take the scenic route. I want to enjoy the view before the storm hits." The drive up the Pacific Coast Highway was smooth, the rhythmic sound of the ocean waves providing a calming soundtrack. As the town car turned onto my street, the sheer scale of Andre's delusion came into full view. The entire block was lined with expensive sports cars and luxury sedans. My driver pulled up to the wrought iron gates of my estate. A young valet attendant rushed forward to open my door. I stepped out onto the driveway, the cool night breeze catching the heavy silk of my crimson gown. I did not hand the valet my keys. I simply nodded to him and began my deliberate walk up the illuminated pathway toward the open double doors. The sound of a live string quartet drifted through the crisp evening air. Everything was glowing under the warm light of elegant string lights. I walked through the massive mahogany doors into the grand foyer. No one stopped me. The catering staff was incredibly busy rushing around with silver trays. I walked straight through the living room, noting the grotesque velvet sectionals Rachel purchased with stolen money. I stepped out through the open French doors onto the expansive back patio. The scene was sickeningly lavish. Dozens of people dressed in designer evening wear were mingling around my swimming pool. A massive white event tent dominated the lawn, erasing the peaceful sanctuary I had originally built. I stood at the top of the stone steps, a striking figure in deep red surrounded by muted pastels and black tuxedos. For a long moment, I just watched them. I spotted my aunts and uncles huddled by the ice sculpture, laughing at my mother. Susan was wearing a diamond necklace she could absolutely not afford. Then the inevitable ripple effect finally began. A woman turned and saw me standing there. She nudged her husband. He looked, and then someone else looked. The mindless chatter near the stairs began to die down. The silence spread outward like a wave, rapidly consuming the clinking of crystal glasses and loud laughter. The string quartet faltered. The lead cellist missed a note, and within seconds, the music completely stopped. The silence that fell over the massive party was absolute and deafening. Every single eye in the backyard was locked entirely on me. I slowly descended the stone steps, my heels clicking sharply against the pavers. Nervous whispers erupted from the crowd. I heard my Aunt Carol gasp loudly. I saw my cousin David point a finger. And then, standing near the fully stocked outdoor bar, I saw them, Rachel and Andre. Rachel froze, her champagne flute suspended halfway to her mouth, her face draining of all color. Andre stood right next to her, his jaw completely clenched, his eyes wide, with a mixture of shock and sudden undeniable panic. Before either of them could move, a figure shoved his way aggressively through the wealthy crowd. It was my father, Thomas. His face was a mask of pure fury. He stomped across the patio, his heavy footsteps breaking the tense silence. He marched straight up to me and grabbed my bare arm with a punishing, bruising grip, his fingers digging heavily into my skin. "What the hell are you doing here?" Thomas hissed, keeping his voice low enough that the entire party could not hear the exact words, though everyone could clearly see his violent body language. "You are trespassing. Get out of here right now before I have the security guards drag you out." I did not flinch. I did not try to pull my arm away. I looked down at his hand gripping my arm, and then I looked directly into his angry, desperate eyes. "Take your hand off me, Dad." I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying an icy authority I had never used with him before. "Let go." He tightened his grip for a split second, trying to exert his usual physical dominance, but the absolute lack of fear in my eyes made him hesitate. He released my arm, taking a half step back, though his chest was still heaving with anger. "I warned you," Claire Thomas growled, pointing a thick finger at my face. "You signed the release agreement. You took the $50,000. You have absolutely no right to be on this property. I am calling the police right now, and I am going to press charges for criminal trespassing. You will be locked in a psychiatric ward by midnight." I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out the gold-foiled invitation Rachel sent to me that morning. I held it up high so all the surrounding guests could clearly read the elaborate calligraphy. "I was invited," I replied loudly, ensuring my voice carried across the silent patio. "Rachel specifically asked me to come." Thomas stared at the heavy gold cardstock in my hand. His mouth opened and closed silently, his entire argument completely destroyed by the physical proof of his golden daughter's cruelty. He had assumed I was crashing the party in a fit of manic desperation. He never imagined Rachel would be arrogant enough to actually invite me just to mock my supposed poverty. In that brief moment of his absolute confusion, I stepped around him. I did not walk toward Rachel and Andre. Instead, I turned my attention to the elevated wooden platform at the edge of the patio where a hired DJ was currently standing behind a massive soundboard. The string quartet had been playing nearby, but the DJ controlled the main microphone and the primary speaker system that was wired throughout the entire property. I walked purposefully through the sea of guests. The wealthy elites, the fake investors Andre was trying to impress, and my gossiping relatives all instinctively took a step back to let me pass. My crimson gown swept across the stone pavers. I climbed the 3 wooden steps onto the DJ platform. The young man wearing heavy headphones looked up at me in alarm. He reached out to stop me, but I simply picked up the wireless microphone resting on the edge of his table and gave him a look so intensely authoritative that he immediately stepped back, raising his hands in surrender. I turned around to face the massive crowd. Hundreds of faces stared up at me in absolute silence. I tapped the microphone twice. The sharp, amplified thumps echoed loudly across the lawn, cutting through the night air and commanding total attention. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting smoothly through the high-end speakers. "Welcome to Malibu. I know you are all having a wonderful time enjoying the champagne and the beautiful ocean view. I wanted to take a very brief moment to make a special toast to our hosts tonight." I looked directly at Andre. He was standing near the outdoor bar, rigid as a board, his eyes darting toward the exits, as if he were calculating how fast he could run. "Andre," I continued, my tone incredibly cheerful and light, "I have to publicly congratulate you. You have always told this family that you are a financial visionary. You always said you understood the complex mechanics of wealth creation better than anyone else. And this week, you truly proved it to all of us. You executed a real estate transaction so bold, so breathtakingly aggressive that it belongs in a textbook." Whispers rippled through the crowd. The business contacts Andre had invited began nodding, smiling in agreement, completely misinterpreting my sarcasm for genuine praise. They thought they were witnessing a heartwarming family reconciliation. "You saw a $5 million estate sitting here with dead equity," I projected into the microphone using the exact ridiculous phrases he had thrown at me in the lawyer office. "And you took decisive action. You transferred the property, you leveraged the asset, and you secured $4 million in cash, out refinance funds in record time. It takes a very special kind of entrepreneur to pull off a move like that, without conducting a single standard title search." The smiles on the faces of his investors suddenly faltered. A few of the older, more experienced businessmen in the crowd frowned, exchanging confused glances. Buying a luxury property without a thorough title search was not visionary, it was financial suicide. Rachel finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. Her face turned a violent shade of red. She hiked up the skirt of her expensive maternity dress and practically sprinted across the patio toward the DJ platform. "Turn that off right now!" Rachel screamed hysterically, completely abandoning her fragile, expectant mother act. She scrambled up the wooden stairs, lunging toward me with her hands outstretched to snatch the microphone. I calmly sidestepped her clumsy attack. She stumbled forward, barely catching her balance against the edge of the DJ table. I held my ground, keeping the microphone firmly in my right hand. "Careful, Rachel," I warned over the speakers, my voice echoing around the estate. "You do not want to raise your blood pressure. We are just celebrating your husband's massive success. He wanted everyone here tonight to know exactly how he operates his business. I am simply giving him the grand public recognition he so desperately craves." "Claire, please stop talking!" Andre yelled from the grass, his voice cracking with genuine terror. He took a few steps toward the platform, his hands raised in a pleading gesture. But I was absolutely not stopping right now. The trap was fully open, the entire audience was completely captivated, and it was finally time to drop the ultimate heavy hammer. "You see," I said into the microphone, looking out at the sea of bewildered faces. "Andre loves to talk about debt equity. When he and my father forged my signature on a quitclaim deed to steal this house, they thought they had outsmarted a simple accountant. What they failed to realize is that I never actually owned this property in my personal name. It was owned by the Horizon Management Trust, And as a forensic accountant, I specifically structured that trust to carry a legally binding $3.5 million federal tax lien. The crowd collectively gasped. A low rumble of murmurs swept through the affluent guests. Several of the sharply dressed investors Andre had been trying to impress immediately set their champagne glasses down on the rented tables. Their expressions shifted from polite confusion to absolute horror. They knew exactly what a federal tax lien meant. Andre stopped walking. His arms fell limply to his sides. His face lost every ounce of its color, transforming into a sickly pale mask of shock. Rachel remained frozen on the wooden steps, her eyes wide, frantically looking back and forth between me and her husband, waiting for him to shut me down. But he could not speak. For those of you who do not understand high-level real estate law, let me break down the math of Andre's absolute genius, I continued smoothly, my voice ringing clear across the manicured lawn. A quitclaim deed does not just transfer a house. It transfers every single debt attached to that house. So when Andre bypassed a legitimate title company to rush his little forgery, he legally volunteered to personally absorb my $3.5 million tax debt to the Internal Revenue Service. He thought he was getting a free $5 million mansion. Instead, he legally signed up to pay millions to the federal government. My father Thomas pushed his way to the front of the crowd. "You are lying," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "I processed the paperwork myself. There was no lien. You are just making this up to humiliate your sister." "I am not making anything up, Dad," I replied calmly over the speakers. "If you had hired a real title agent, instead of bribing your corrupt notary friend, you would have seen the filing. But your arrogance blinded you. And it gets so much better. Because Andre did not just transfer the house, he immediately used it as collateral to secure a $4 million cash-out refinance from a federally insured bank in New York. The gasps from the audience were louder this time. A few people actually took physical steps away from Andre, as if his financial ruin were a contagious disease. "Think about the math." "Andre," I said, looking directly down at my brother-in-law. "You took a property that already owed $3.5 million to the government, hid that debt, and used the compromised asset to borrow $4 million in cash. Your new family portfolio is completely underwater. You have defrauded a major financial institution. You have committed federal wire fraud. And because you transferred those stolen funds across state lines, you have officially invited the highest levels of federal law enforcement right into your bank accounts." "That is impossible," Andre whispered loudly, shaking his head. His voice was raw and panicked. It was not amplified, but the patio was so deathly quiet that everyone heard him. My lawyer looked at the deed. The bank approved the loan. The money is sitting in my account right now. You are just a jealous liar. I am a millionaire. "Are you sure about that?" I asked, tilting my head and offering him a devastating, pitying smile. "Are you entirely sure that $4 million is still sitting in your account? Because the Internal Revenue Service was notified of your massive new tax liability yesterday afternoon. And when the federal government realizes a debtor suddenly has $4 million in liquid cash sitting in a California checking account, they do not send a polite letter asking for their cut. They act immediately to secure the funds. They seize everything." I pointed to the expensive phone sitting in his jacket pocket. "I suggest you check your balances, Andre. Check your business accounts. Check your personal checking. Check the credit cards you used to pay for this extravagant party. Go ahead. Show all your wealthy new friends here how much liquidity you really have. Show my parents the glorious financial empire you promised them. Prove me wrong right now in front of every single person standing here tonight. You are nothing but a common thief, and you just stole your own permanent destruction. Go right on." Andre stood absolutely paralyzed for a long moment. The silence on the patio was so profound that I could hear the massive ice sculpture melting water dripping steadily onto the stone pavers. Then, moving with the jerky, uncoordinated motions of a panicked animal, he reached into the inner pocket of his custom-tailored tuxedo. He pulled out his sleek smartphone. His hands were shaking so violently that he almost dropped the expensive device onto the grass. He tapped the screen, his eyes darting frantically. The glow of the screen illuminated his sweating face in the dim evening light. He opened his primary banking application. The crowd held its collective breath. Everyone was watching him intently. My father took a cautious step forward, his own face tight with desperate hope that I was somehow just making a sick joke. Andre stared at the screen. He blinked once, twice. He swiped his thumb across the glass, refreshing the page. A strange, choked sound escaped his throat. It sounded like a man who had just been punched directly in the stomach. He tapped another icon, opening his business accounts. Then another. He checked the credit card apps. He checked the limited liability company portal. "What is it?" Rachel demanded, her voice shrill and trembling as she finally stepped off the wooden platform. Andre, tell her she is lying. Show everyone the account balances right now. Andre did not answer her. He slowly turned the phone around so Rachel could see the screen. I did not need to be standing next to them to know exactly what it said. Every single account, from his personal checking to the corporate shell he used for the cash-out refinance, displayed a bright red banner across the top. Frozen. Federal order. Rachel let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She snatched the phone from his hands, tapping the screen wildly, as if she could simply swipe away the United States government. No, 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 she stammered, tears ruining her perfect makeup. This is a mistake. The bank made a mistake. Call them right now, Andre. Call your sleazy lawyer. Tell them to fix this immediately. The wealthy investors and business contacts did not need to hear another word. They recognized a sinking ship when they saw one. They immediately began backing away from the outdoor bar, placing their expensive champagne glasses down on whatever flat surface they could find. They were quietly and quickly moving toward the side gates, desperate to distance themselves from a man who had just been publicly marked by the Internal Revenue Service. Nobody wants to be collateral damage in a federal tax raid. Before anyone could formulate a coherent thought, a loud mechanical grinding noise shattered the tense atmosphere. It came from the front of the house. The heavy, unmistakable rumble of a large diesel engine echoed down the long driveway, followed by the screech of metal scraping against pavement. The guests murmured in confusion. Several people near the edge of the patio hurried around the side of the house to see what was happening. I calmly descended the wooden steps of the DJ platform and followed the crowd, my crimson gown gliding over the grass. Andre and Rachel sprinted past me, pushing their own guests out of the way in a blind panic. When we reached the expansive front driveway, the scene was absolute perfection. A massive, heavy-duty flatbed tow truck was parked diagonally across the entrance. A burly man in a reflective safety vest was currently operating a hydraulic winch. The thick steel cable was already securely hooked to the front axle of Andre's brand-new $250,000 matte black Lamborghini Urus. "Hey!" Andre screamed, waving his arms wildly as he sprinted down the driveway. "What do you think you are doing? Take that hook off my car right now. I own that vehicle. I paid cash for it on Tuesday. You cannot touch my property." The tow truck driver did not even flinch. He casually pulled a clipboard from the passenger seat of his rig and held it out. He did not look angry. He just looked bored. "I am executing a federal asset seizure order, buddy," the driver said loudly so the gathering crowd could hear. The purchase was made with frozen funds tied to a massive federal tax lien. The dealership recalled the title this afternoon at the request of the government. This car belongs to the feds now. Andre stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at the clipboard, then looked up at the Lamborghini as the winch groaned, slowly dragging the luxury vehicle up the steep metal ramp of the tow truck. The expensive tires squeaked loudly against the steel. It was the physical sound of his entire fake empire being hauled away. He fell to his knees on the pavement, completely broken. Andre remained on his knees, his expensive velvet blazer gathering dirt from my paved driveway. He watched the heavy metal ramp of the tow truck slowly incline, securing his stolen vehicle for transport. Rachel rushed to his side, pulling frantically at his shoulder, her voice shrill and completely devoid of its usual arrogant confidence. "Get up, Andre!" she cried, looking around wildly at the horrified faces of their remaining guests. "Do something! Call the police! They cannot just take our property." "Actually, they absolutely can," a deep, commanding voice announced from the edge of the driveway. The crowd parted instinctively. A man I recognized immediately stepped forward. It was Special Agent Harrison, but he was not wearing his tactical vest just yet. He was wearing a sharp-tailored tuxedo, looking exactly like one of the high-end investors Andre had invited to impress. Next to him stood Investigator Thorne, wearing an elegant evening gown. They had been standing in the crowd the entire time, drinking sparkling water and watching the public confession unfold. Harrison reached inside his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open, revealing the gleaming gold badge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Beside him, Thorne produced her own credentials for the Internal Revenue Service. The collective gasp from the crowd this time was not just shock, it was raw, genuine terror. The wealthy elites who had been mingling and laughing just 20 minutes ago suddenly realized they were standing squarely in the middle of a federal sting operation. Andre Carter, Agent Harrison, said, his voice carrying the undeniable weight of federal authority. "Stand up and put your hands behind your back." Andre did not move. He was completely paralyzed, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the gold badge as if it were a loaded weapon. Rachel, however, completely lost her mind. "No!" she screamed, stepping in front of her husband like a human shield. "You have no right to be here. This is a private residence. We are hosting a private event. You cannot just walk in here and harass us because my jealous sister told you some ridiculous lies." Agent Harrison did not argue with her. He simply raised his right hand and gave a sharp tactical hand signal. Instantly, the entire dynamic of the party shifted. At least a dozen people I had assumed were just catering staff suddenly sprang into action. The bartender serving drinks on the patio reached under the counter and pulled out a heavy radio. 3 waiters carrying silver trays of appetizers set them down simultaneously on the nearest tables. They unzipped their catering vests, revealing dark blue windbreakers with bright yellow lettering across the back. FBI. IRS. "The perimeter is secure," one of the undercover agents announced loudly over the radio. "The private residence you are referring to is currently an active federal crime scene," Investigator Thorne told Rachel, her voice colder than the melting ice sculpture by the pool. "And we have federal warrants signed by a magistrate judge authorizing us to secure this property, freeze all associated assets, and apprehend the primary suspect. Now, step aside, ma'am, or you will be charged with interfering with a federal investigation." Rachel scrambled backward, her hands flying to her mouth, completely abandoning her husband the second she realized her own freedom was at risk. 2 federal agents grabbed Andre by the arms and hauled him to his feet. He was dead weight. His knees buckled and they had to hold him upright. "Andre Carter," Agent Harrison recited firmly, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around Andre's wrists echoed loudly over the driveway. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a 30-year cycle of toxic family manipulation finally snapping in half. "This is a mistake," Andre babbled, tears streaming down his face, ruining his perfectly manicured image. "I did not steal anything. Thomas told me it was legal. My father-in-law told me he handled the paperwork. He is a banker. He told me it was a clean transfer." "Throwing your own family under the bus will not unfreeze your bank accounts," Agent Harrison replied dryly. "But do not worry. We have an arrest warrant for him, too." Harrison turned his attention to the crowd of terrified guests huddled on the lawn. "Ladies and gentlemen, the party is officially over. Please make your way to the exits in an orderly fashion. If you have done business with Mr. Carter in the past, I highly recommend you contact your legal counsel in the morning." The guests did not need to be told twice. They practically trampled each other, rushing toward their cars, desperate to escape the blast radius of Andre's massive federal implosion. The valet attendants abandoned their posts, leaving the wealthy investors to frantically search for their own keys in the sprawling lockbox. It was a humiliating, chaotic stampede of the exact same people Andre had spent his entire life trying to impress. I stood quietly near the grand mahogany front doors, my crimson gown glowing under the porch lights. I watched as the fake millionaire, stripped of his luxury car, his stolen money, and his hollow dignity, was shoved roughly into the back of an unmarked federal vehicle. His velvet blazer was rumpled, his head was bowed, and the flashing red and blue lights illuminated his total defeat. The raid was executed with absolute, flawless precision. But the night was not over yet. My parents still had to pay their ultimate tab. As the taillights of the federal vehicle illuminated the driveway, the reality of the situation finally shattered the remaining illusions of my family. But the vehicle had not moved yet. Agent Harrison was standing by the open rear door conferring with another officer. Suddenly, Andre launched his body toward the opening, his face contorted in sheer desperation. "Wait! You have to listen to me!" Andre screamed, his voice cracking violently. "I did not plan this alone. Rachel knew everything. She orchestrated the entire thing. She told me Claire was having a mental breakdown and that we had a legal right to step in. She was the one who packed up the house." "Do not just take me." Rachel, who had been sobbing on the grass, instantly snapped her head up. The protective, loving wife persona completely evaporated, replaced by the vicious, self-serving instinct that defined our entire upbringing. She scrambled to her feet and pointed a manicured finger at her husband. "You filthy liar!" she shrieked, her voice echoing across the empty lawn. "You are the one drowning in debt. You forged the paperwork. I am just a pregnant woman. I trusted my husband to provide for me. You ruined my life, Andre." They were tearing each other apart, publicly displaying the absolute lack of loyalty that had always rotted beneath their perfect surface. Before the agents could finally shut the heavy door on Andre, my father charged forward. Thomas was sweating profusely, his expensive suit jacket hanging awkwardly on his frame. "Officers, please, you have to understand," Thomas pleaded, holding his hands up defensively. "My son-in-law is clearly trying to deflect blame. My daughter Rachel is entirely innocent. And as for me, I am a respected former bank executive. I simply facilitated a standard family transfer. I thought I was protecting family assets." Special Agent Harrison slowly turned away from the vehicle. He looked at my father with a gaze so cold it could freeze the Pacific Ocean. "Protecting assets by coercing a registered notary into stamping a fraudulent document without the primary signatory present?" Harrison asked dryly. "Because we already paid a visit to your old friend at the bank this afternoon. He was very cooperative. He confessed to everything the moment we mentioned federal conspiracy charges. He handed over his logs and admitted you pressured him into backdating the quitclaim deed." Thomas stopped breathing. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Investigator Thorne stepped forward, holding a thick manila envelope. "Thomas Thorne," said her voice perfectly crisp. "As a former executive of a federally insured commercial bank, you are fully aware of the penalties for banking fraud. By actively participating in a conspiracy to defraud a financial institution and using your professional connections to secure a forged legal document, you have violated the core terms of your severance and retirement agreements. The federal government is officially seizing your entire banking pension. You will not receive another dime for the rest of your life." The words hit my father like a physical blow. His entire identity, his bloated ego, and his financial security were entirely tied to that massive pension. He clutched his chest, his fingers digging into the fabric of his white shirt. His face turned a dangerous shade of gray. He began gasping for air, his knees buckling beneath him. "My pension!" he wheezed, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "You cannot take my pension. I worked for 40 years. I am a senior vice president. Susan screamed as Thomas collapsed onto the paved driveway, clutching his heart. The federal agents did not panic. They had seen this exact reaction from white-collar criminals 100 times before. One of the undercover medics stepped forward, calmly checking his pulse and radioing for a standard ambulance. It was a classic panic attack brought on by the sudden crushing weight of accountability. I watched my father gasping on the ground, the man who had stolen my college fund to pay for a lavish wedding, the man who had always treated me like an expendable resource. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No pity, no guilt, only a profound clinical satisfaction. He had built his entire life on projecting authority and superiority, and now he was hyperventilating on the concrete stripped of his wealth, his reputation, and his freedom. Agent Harrison looked down at my father, then gestured to the other officers. Read him his rights and get him ready for transport. Once the paramedics clear him, Harrison ordered his men. Then he slammed the heavy door of the federal SUV shut, finally cutting off the frantic screaming. The engine roared to life, and the dark federal vehicle slowly rolled down the long driveway, carrying the fake millionaire toward a very real federal prison cell. The red and blue lights of the SUV faded into the distance, leaving behind an eerie silence on my quiet Malibu street. The massive housewarming party was abandoned. Rented chairs were knocked over, half-empty champagne flutes littered the stone patio, and the caterers had vanished. The only people left on the expansive property were a few federal agents securing the perimeter, the paramedics hovering over my father, my sister Rachel, my mother Susan, and me. I stood still near the grand entrance of my home, my crimson gown rustling softly in the cool ocean breeze. I watched the paramedics carefully lift Thomas onto a stretcher. He was conscious but unresponsive, staring blankly up at the night sky as the reality of his shattered banking legacy crushed him. They wheeled him toward the ambulance. That was when Susan turned her attention away from the stretcher and looked at me. For my entire life, my mother had looked at me with varying degrees of disappointment, annoyance, or calculated manipulation. But tonight, as she stared at me across the driveway, her eyes held absolute primal terror. The arrogant matriarch who slapped me just days earlier was gone. Her diamond necklace looked heavy and absurd against her pale, shaking skin. She took a hesitant step toward me, then another, until she was practically running. "Claire," Susan cried out, her voice cracking with a desperate, ragged edge. "Claire, please, you must stop this. You have to talk to them." She closed the distance between us, and to my absolute astonishment, her knees buckled. My mother, the woman who cared more about her country club reputation than her own daughters, fell hard onto the concrete right at my feet. She grabbed the fabric of my dress with trembling hands, looking up at me with tears streaming down her face. "You have to tell the federal agents it was a misunderstanding," Susan begged, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "Tell them you gave Andre permission. Tell them your father was just trying to help consolidate the family assets. If you do not stop this right now, they will put your father in prison. He will die in there, Claire. He has a heart condition. They took his pension. We will have absolutely nothing left." I looked down at the woman who happily drained my college fund to buy Rachel a lavish wedding. I looked at the woman who watched her husband forge my signature to steal my $5 million home and celebrated it with an upscale barbecue. "It was not a misunderstanding, Mom," I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth or sympathy. "It was a calculated, deliberate federal crime. You all sat in a room and decided that my life, my hard work, and my property belonged to you. You thought you could just take what was mine because you decided I did not deserve it. But we are your family," Susan sobbed, burying her face against my legs, resorting to the only weapon she had left. "We are your blood. You cannot do this to your own blood. Rachel is pregnant. She needs her husband. I need your father. Please, Claire. I am begging you. I will do anything. We will give the house back. We will apologize. Just call the agents and tell them you made a mistake." I gently but firmly stepped back, forcing her to release my dress. She slumped forward onto the pavement, a pathetic weeping heap of ruined entitlement. Rachel stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped tightly around her own stomach, watching our mother beg. Rachel did not say a word. She was entirely defeated. I unclasped my designer evening clutch. I reached inside and pulled out the crisp, rectangular cashier check they forced me to accept at the sleazy lawyer office just days ago. The $50,000 they thought would buy my silence and erase their massive theft. I held the check up so both Susan and Rachel could clearly see it under the bright porch lights. "You cannot give the house back," I stated with absolute icy clarity, "because it was never yours to begin with, and I cannot stop the federal government from prosecuting a wire fraud case that you all thoroughly documented online." I gripped the edges of the heavy paper check. With one smooth, deliberate motion, I tore it perfectly in half. Susan gasped, her eyes widening as the sound of tearing paper echoed in the quiet driveway. I let the two torn pieces of the check flutter from my fingers. They drifted down through the cool night air, landing softly on the concrete, right next to my mother's trembling hands. "Use this for your defense attorneys," I told her. "You are going to need every single penny." I turned my back on my weeping mother and walked down the long driveway, leaving the ruins of my family behind in the cool ocean breeze. My driver was waiting patiently at the curb. I stepped into the black town car and told him to take me back to my hotel. I slept that night with a profound, unbroken peace I had not felt since I was a child. The next morning, the Los Angeles sun rose bright and warm, casting a golden light over the city. I sat on the balcony of my hotel suite, drinking a cup of black coffee, while Naomi updated me over a secure phone line. The legal fallout was swift and merciless. Andre spent the night in a federal holding cell. Because he had $4 million of stolen cash sitting in his accounts, the federal magistrate judge deemed him a massive flight risk and denied him bail. He traded his custom velvet blazer for an orange jumpsuit, and his sleazy lawyer immediately dropped him as a client the moment he realized the retainer check was going to bounce. My father Thomas managed to post bail using the equity of the house in Calabasas, but his life was entirely over. True to her word, Investigator Thorne initiated the seizure of his banking pension. He was facing decades in federal prison for conspiracy and bank fraud. My mother and Rachel were left completely destitute, frantically calling every distant relative they had ever ignored, begging for loans that nobody was willing to give them. By noon, I checked out of the hotel and drove back to Malibu. The front gate was locked, and the police tape had been removed. I unlocked the heavy mahogany doors and stepped inside my house. It smelled like stale champagne, cheap perfume, and desperate greed. The gaudy velvet sectionals Rachel had purchased were still sitting in the living room. The ugly kitchen cabinets they tried to install were half finished. The entire estate felt contaminated by their brief toxic presence. I pulled out my phone and called a premium industrial cleaning service, the kind that specializes in deep chemical fumigation and biohazard removal. Within 2 hours, a fleet of white vans pulled up my driveway. A crew of men in full hazmat suits marched into the house. I gave them very specific instructions. Rip out the velvet furniture, tear down the new cabinets, scrub every single inch of the hardwood floors, the walls, and the ceiling. I paid them double their usual rate to wrap the entire estate in a massive striped fumigation tent. I stood on the front lawn holding my leather tote bag with my grandmother's urn safely tucked inside and watched as the heavy canvas dropped over the roof of the $5 million house. It was a literal and symbolic cleansing. The toxic infection that had plagued my life for 33 years was finally being exterminated. The poison was being drawn out of the walls entirely. As I watched the chemical fog begin to fill the tent, I realized something fundamental about family. Society conditions us to believe that shared DNA is an unbreakable contract, a mandatory obligation to endure abuse, disrespect, and exploitation. We are conditioned to smile through the pain and keep the peace at all costs. We are told to forgive the unforgivable simply because it comes from a parent or a sibling. But as a forensic accountant, I view the world through a different lens. I look at ledgers. I look at investments and returns. For my entire life, I invested my love, my money, and my sanity into a family that yielded nothing but massive emotional debt. They saw my kindness as a weakness to be leveraged, They thought my silence was an open invitation to steal my entire future. They forgot that independence is not given. It is meticulously built brick by brick, dollar by dollar, until you are strong enough to defend your own borders. The true cost of freedom is the willingness to walk away from the people who drag you down, even if you have known them your entire life. There is a beautiful, undeniable, sweet logic to forensic accounting. Numbers never lie, and debts always come due. My family thought they could forge a new reality, but in the end, the math caught up with them. Thank you so much for watching my story today. If this resonated with you, please let me know in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering stories. Remember, you never owe your success to the people who tried to ensure your failure. Keep building your empire, protect your peace, and never let anyone sign your name with a cheap black pen. The most profound lesson we can extract from Claire's journey is that biological relation does not automatically equal unconditional love or grant anyone an all-access pass to your success. Society constantly conditions us to believe that blood is thicker than water and that we must always forgive family simply because we share DNA. But this story completely shatters that dangerous myth. It teaches us that toxic people will gladly use the concept of family as a weapon to manipulate, drain, and destroy you if you allow them to cross your boundaries. Claire showed us that true independence is not just about earning your own money. It is about building an impenetrable fortress around your peace of mind and refusing to let anyone, even your own parents or siblings, tear it down out of jealousy or greed. When you are the one doing the hard work, while your family enables bad behavior and expects you to foot the bill, you are not being a good family member. You are simply being a financial hostage. The courage to walk away from people who fundamentally disrespect you is the highest form of self-care. Claire did not scream or throw tantrums. She looked at the cold, hard facts of her situation and used the law to permanently sever the ties that were holding her back. We must learn to view our personal boundaries as non-negotiable contracts. If someone repeatedly breaks the terms of your respect and trust, you have every right to cancel their access to your life without carrying a single ounce of guilt. Audit your own relationships today. Establish your absolute boundaries and never let the guilt of shared DNA keep you chained to people who do not